like there's these competing forces at times, and attitudes by people who are like, if you legislate something, then it's going to be government overreach, no matter what party does it. And now the genie's out of the bottle, right? The institutions hold way less power. Everyone's a publisher, or could be. So the fringe voices are much louder and more easily accessed.
Yeah.
I don't know. So like, I keep coming back to the idea in my mind around this problem. And the word I keep coming back to is inoculation, right? How do you come through an education system inoculated from misinformation and disinformation? How do you go and consume misinformation and consume disinformation, and yet it doesn't change your ability to find actual truth? Hello and welcome to Unqualified Advice, an entertaining show for entertainment purposes. Join us as we talk about running our businesses, what we've been learning, and how we're applying lessons from academia and real life as entrepreneurs and investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Topics discussed represent opinions represented by parties with different circumstances than your own and should not be taken as advice. Any discussion of securities or other investments should not be relied upon as investment advice. Consult your personal financial advisor and perform your own due diligence. Podcast hosts, guests, and clients of Fig Social Capital may own positions in securities discussed in this podcast. Sean, how are you?
Hey, Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm
Happy
good.
Friday to you.
Happy Friday.
Weekday
the market's
recording.
Open. Yeah.
A rarity for us.
I know. It's risky. We're going to move the market.
So we're not live streaming.
Do it live.
Maybe someday. That's a good question. I've been pulling everything up and I hadn't actually looked specifically how the market is doing today. Up 0.5% on the S&P, NASDAQ up 1.23. Oh yeah. Not surprised.
You might have to refresh that. I think they've gone down a bit.
Might have to what?
Refresh? Or maybe my stock rover is slow.
I don't know. I might be. That's actually very possible. I could be on not a fresh screen here. Oh,
I show up 30 bips on the S&P and 105 on NASDAQ.
Yep. That's where I'm at now. Sorry, just hadn't hit refresh in a few minutes. Was looking at a static screen. Not a good idea. Well, there you go. There's.
Sean's trading futures, so he's got it locked in.
So some interesting news I saw yesterday that I thought was a nice just win for the U.S. in general. Did you see what's going on at TSMC in Arizona?
No.
Their chip production yields surpassed their Taiwan plant.
Wow, that's unexpected. Yeah.
Yep. They production yields on Arizona are 4 percentage points higher.
Wow.
But I guess it's all just in kind of trial production. The Pheonix plant, it's saying the Pheonix plant began, trial production earlier this year. But that's a significant.
Is it all like the easiest chips in the world to make? And they're like, yay.
Exactly. I don't think so. I think these are.
I think it's like an advanced plant, right? It's not, 18 nanometer or something. Yeah.
No. They're building some of their most advanced chips there. I don't know if it's the top, but I think that was part of the deal of the funding,
I would
right?
think so.
Because they got CHIPS Act funding, so they had to. Yeah, and there's room for at least this. This is just the first fab. There's room for 6 there. So it's the first of
1,100 acres.
Yeah, first of many. So we'll see. I don't know. I should do some more research on what their overall plan is there. But that was just. I was happy to see that. That's chips are a very difficult thing to make, and that they're able to effectively scale that knowledge across the ocean is pretty impressive to me.
TSMC Arizona's first fab will operate its leading edge semiconductor process technology, N4 process. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's 4 nanometer.
Yeah.
The second fab will utilize its leading edge N3 and N2 process. Operational in 2028.
I think that's their most advanced, right? The 2 and 3.
Oh yeah. That's out there. That's like atoms. You're dealing in atoms.
Exactly. So they're starting off with not quite their most advanced, from sure a lot of very good reasons, and moving up the the difficulty scale.
Where do they get their water? It's very water intensive process, I think.
Colorado River? I don't know. No, what? That's a good question. Let's
Yeah,
ask. Let's
Colorado
ask
mountains.
the interwebs. No, the Colorado River.
Yeah.
There are 4 large underground pipes to transport water from the Colorado River into TSMC's location in North Phoenix. They also have water from the Salt and Verde rivers coming in, and a small amount of Phoenix's groundwater. So there you go. They're getting it from all over.
Yeah, I was gonna say getting it from every source they can. I wonder how
Yeah.
much they go through. Like we talked about that plant in Lebanon, Indiana, right? And the controversy that is causing. Like my dad visited, or my parents visited, and I was talking to my dad, and it was on his mind. Like he had read about it after talking.
Oh,
about
really?
it
What did he have? What was his opinion of the matter?
I don't know that he had a strong opinion. It was more like, wow, like, what is that going to cause, right? But it was kind of similar to like, you're data driven, I'm data driven. Most people are emotional beings, right? Like they see a big number, they have no idea what it relates to. And what we did live on the podcast was try to relate that number. So I don't know, I wouldn't call it more comfortable, but you get more knowledgeable with like, what exactly does that number mean when you ask some questions and pull up some data? Whereas most people are just reading the headline, like reading that number in isolation and it not being computable in one's mind,
That's true. Yeah, because like, how do you like imagining the volume here? Because I'm looking now at the number of what TSMC's first fab uses, which is going to be, when it's at full production, 4.75 million gallons of water per day, roughly 2% of the Phoenix area's homes demand. But they're going to be recycling about 65% of their demand. So
Nice.
yeah, so not so bad. What will that take it up to? Yeah, so that will, so yeah, they'll be pulling down 2 million gallons a day, and then take that times 6, so 12 million gallons a day at full capacity. Did I do that math right? Somewhere in that range. I mean, I don't know how that scales, because some of it's for cooling and things of that nature. That might scale differently.
Yeah, there might be like one cooling plant for 2 fabs in the future, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't know.
So that, I don't think that's actually terribly unreasonable when you think about it in terms of the total area of city, the total city of Phoenix's usage. Though I know the city of Phoenix does use a lot of water. City of Phoenix does use a lot of water. I'm getting all tongue-tied today. Sorry, y'all.
Phoenix, there's got to be people in Phoenix that still like water a yard, even though it's not a place to have a yard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, one would think. Well, yeah, that was one interesting thing that came across my mind. Have you read anything interesting lately, Dan?
A book is what's on my mind because I just finished it. It's called Dark Matter, and I would highly recommend it. It was so much fun.
Is that the guy that wrote Wayward Pines?
I don't know. I haven't actually looked up any of his other books. I was going to today because
Dark Matter, and it's also, isn't it an Apple TV series?
I don't know. Blake Crouch.
Yeah, that's him. He also wrote an interesting series of books called Wayward Pines.
Okay.
Wait, Wayward Pines? Yeah, Wayward Pines. I don't know if his writings evolved at all. It was okay, but the story was pretty interesting. It might be worth a read if you like that. But yeah, I've been planning on checking out that Dark Matter one because I kind of started watching the series and I was like, "Ooh, this is really interesting." Then I heard it was a book, and I decided to pause and go through the book first and then finish the series.
Yeah, I'd recommend picking it up.
Okay.
It's fun.
Good to know. Well, I blazed through an audiobook this week on the commute of Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman.
Yeah.
The version I got, I didn't realize was the abridged version, which was only about 5 hours, and didn't need to be any longer. I'm glad that I'm glad I went with the abridged. I have a friend in our friend group down here. He's a retired school teacher. We call him the Philosopher King.
Nice.
But his commentary on nonfiction is that most of it could be about a third the length that it really is because there's a lot of filler. So yeah, in this case,
just repeat story, like 3 stories to make one point.
Exactly. So sometimes the abridged version is a good way to go. It it was a very interesting take, and it was very of the time. At he
When was it
literally
written? 79?
disregarded the future. So the premise. Let's talk about the premise. He's talking about, starts off comparing, contrasting Huxley and Orwell's vision of the future, and basically their visions of dystopia, and how they get there from two base premises. One being one of control and constriction of resources and information, and the other being an absolute apathy because you're flooded with too much. Like there's just all the pleasure you could want, all the information, all the media.
To the point where you can't parse it. It's
Yeah, exactly.
paradox of choice.
And so people just become blasé and don't, and give and cede control to whoever.
But the dopamine reserves are gone because by the time 8:30 a.m. rolls around, you've been blasted. Your brain is toast.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so his argument is that, and this was written in 1985. So let's almost 40 years ago. It was published in 85, so he was probably writing it 40 years ago, really.
Yeah, in a bipolar world.
Hold up. So yeah, he was writing this 40 years ago and saying, how are we moving towards this Huxleyan future? And his argument and thesis was that it was through television, essentially, because everything we do is starting to had essentially become revolving around the television, and the way we learned and were fed information. Were all about television. And he had a really interesting, some really fascinating points around the way print media developed from being very programmatic to being more very slowly over time, more emotional driven, and television, because then you started to print with the photograph, and then you created even more emotion. And then the way that print narrative used to work was you would have a lot of content lining out every point, working through every detail. And then along came the teletype, where it became much more economical to be able to break your message down much smaller into much smaller pieces, but also then that people would just have the constant need and urge to share information. But what information does a guy in Texas versus a guy in Maine really have to convey? Like, what's really important? Like, so we also,
or even Dallas versus West Texas, right?
Yeah. So then you start to get all this information overload coming in small chunks. It's not enough to actually tell you a full story. So you become informed, maybe more informed, but less learned, or less. It started to change the way we were processing information. Which, okay, I guess that's kind of a point. I'd also say literacy rates were probably worth examining, but he does actually do a good job of explaining how actually in the Western world, Britain had a ton of schools, and American ideal was to also try to keep up with Britain. So literacy rates were actually really quite high.
Relative to so many other places in the world.
Exactly.
At the time. Yeah, okay.
So, but then you get to the television, where it's basically, the newscast version of news comes around, from newspaper to newscast, where they're trying to keep your attention and also sell ads in new ways. And ads become a new way of even teaching people, because they're teaching people about products, and kids actually learn that, I learned from ads in a weird way, was one of his arguments. And I don't know if I fully buy that, but it's kind of an interesting concept. And then it devolves into this, what he called, and now this culture, where you go from something that should be a horrifying thing, like a terrible war in the Middle East, to a baseball game. And it's like, it's just entertaining. You're not like, you suppress the emotions you would feel, because you realize it's not there for you to actually feel. And the information that you're being provided is not information you can actually act upon or do something with.
Only be angered by,
or happy, or happy by,
depending on what side you're on. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's not really useful information. It's information, of course, but it's become just pure entertainment. And
Dopamine again.
That point there is one where I want to circle back to later, which we'll come to. But then he goes on and where he had some points to his arguments that I also thought were a little weak. And he completely at the end mentions the personal computer, but completely discredits and blows it off and says this won't be a thing. So I'm just like, well,
just like IBM, about the same time frame.
So I'm like, well, maybe. But then a lot of his arguments were, in a way, I was thinking, well, actually, I think the computer in a lot of ways solves some of these problems because it allows you to mix in video with text in other unique ways that can be more engaging for learners than ever before.
Definitely more engaging.
I'm not saying better. I'm just saying I think it's a step up. So I
think it depends on the user. I think that's one of the problems through this whole thing is like it depends on the user.
That's true. Well, that's any class room setting, and to some degree.
Yeah. If that's the right or if that is a writer question to ask, then wouldn't you want to be chasing a solution to that question rather than trying to, like, I don't know, outlaw some sort of behavior from the media in a society with a constitution that says free speech, right? Like there's these competing forces at times. And attitudes by people who are like, if you legislate something, then, it's going to be government overreach no matter what party does it. And now the genie's out of the bottle, right? The institutions hold way less power. Everyone's a publisher, or could be. So the fringe voices are much louder and more easily accessed.
Yeah.
I don't know. So like, I keep coming back to the idea in my mind, around this problem. And the word I keep coming back to is inoculation, right? How do you come through an education system inoculated from misinformation and disinformation? How do you go and consume misinformation and consume disinformation? And yet it doesn't change your ability to find actual truth.
Okay. I like this line of discussion. So I also want you to define here for us misinformation and disinformation.
Oh, damn it. That's why I use both of them.
No, because he actually he
did, right?
Specifically disinformation in the text that I was reading.
Okay.
Or in the book.
I could get this backwards.
Okay.
This could be you need to swap out the things, but like misinformation is more like it wasn't done with intention. It's just someone who believes something that's false and is repeating it. And then disinformation is like an active campaign, right? The KGB is feeding information to a New York Times journalist, and the New York Times publishes it, and it's all not actual, but it's meant to.
It's noise.
Designed.
It's noise designed to distract a lot of times.
Perhaps there's a lot of that in TikTok.
Or like noise designed
I would
to
say it's more
distract
active.
I'm sorry.
It's trying to shape a narrative. It's trying to move things in a particular way, which is a lot of how I think about TikTok and other avenues of, Russian bots and that sort of thing, where it is actively trying to tear the fabric of American community apart. Because if we start fighting ourselves, American power and hegemony gets weakened, and that's good for China and Russia. Sorry, we went there.
Yeah. No, hey. TikTok's still on the clock.
Yeah, for years. There's no. Yeah, the government moves slowly.
Yeah, they're coming up on. Is it January? We looked this up recently. I think it's like early January or something, early next year.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, I think that's absolutely an excellent point about how really education should be about parsing out the bullshit. And for lack of a better word, it's like, how do I understand what is in front of me? How do I try to validate if it's good or bad, or just noise, or just, what's its intent? I think
this is one of the reasons I was attracted to history. I really enjoyed that part. And if you have a good history teacher, then it is brought to life, and you get to see the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 sides that are all at play at once. And then, if you watch the right kind of documentaries, or you see the right kind of pictures or whatever, again, going back to like having a teacher that really brings it to life, then you get to see these campaigns, you get to see the propaganda, you get to see the different tools at play, and then you can understand your own world better versus the kind of history that I think a lot of people get, which is boring and it's like basically memorizing dates and things that have occurred. It's a theme that we've talked about before. It's like information versus synthesis, right? And we need more people capable of synthesis rather than just like consuming and being able to repeat information.
Yeah.
Because, you can tell me that bird is neon yellow and I can repeat it to you. Doesn't make it true necessarily.
That's a good point.
I don't know if that's a good example, but thanks for saying it's a good point.
Well, yes, you're right. Like it is about that ability to synthesize the ideas and things that are being presented to you into a viewpoint that, makes sense and you can then do something with. Again, like so much of the information we have coming our way is just, I don't need this. Like, I wish I had better filters on some of it. But then again, I seek some of it out, like social media.
Yeah. We all like trash from time to time.
Yeah. Like, that's why Us Weekly exists or something like things like that.
Yeah.
Or I don't know.
Or a car magazine. Does anybody need a car magazine?
Yeah.
No, but I'll take one. I'd love one.
Yeah, there you go. Do you actually subscribe to any magazines?
The New Yorker.
Okay.
Via paper.
Yeah.
That's
Nice.
the only one anymore. I used to have a good little collection, but that's all gone away. Or it's gone on my phone.
I just
Actually, where it's gone is like an Apple One subscription. So now I get the news, so I can access The Atlantic. I can access a suite of places.
What can you get on that? I've actually never checked that one out. That's interesting. I'll check that out after the show, I guess. I'll make a note here.
I've been happy. Like, I don't know if it's quote unquote worth it, but you get music, you get news, I just tacked it onto the family plan. So like all four of us, even though only two of us are literate, can use it,
Okay. I see.
What would families of 12 done back in the day? Because I don't think Apple One subscription includes 12. People just don't do that anymore.
Yeah, they don't have the product because there's not demand for it, Dan.
Yes.
Right? And anybody that they assume is that it exists is either Amish who wouldn't be buying their products or scamming them, and they're like a dorm full of kids.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Todd over here, he's 46.
So no, I don't know. I'm sure if there was strong demand for that type of an offering, they do corporate.
Can you imagine calling Apple? Well, yeah, that's probably true. I don't know. Phones are so personal now, right? Would work need to pay for a new Apple News subscription? Whatever. So we went to we took a little weekend in Steamboat Springs, and in the hotel room, while the youngest was napping, we turned the TV on to pass some time. And this wasn't like a realization, but it was the first time when we really sat down and like consumed an hour of TV. Not at home. Not at home means we had cable in the hotel room. Cable means you can't choose what's on. Cable means commercials. There was a basket full of tears because the commercials were taking so long, and couldn't watch the only program that she wanted to watch. So I don't know. You mentioned commercials during the Postman thing, and I was like, it's wild to me. You get to see the generational change when you have kids or spend time with kids, and this was one of those where I'm like, wow. I remember my dad saying things like, well, we only had 3 channels, and sometimes it was just dust, no programming, right? and for me, I was like, okay, not how it works for me.
Yeah.
But this one is like, it's just like, it's not computing, right? Just
it's what I want. It's infinite amount of what I want wherever I want it.
That's the scary part. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I remember getting home after school and putting on the TV, and there would be what was on one of 3 or 4 networks that I enjoyed maybe, and I'd be lucky if it was something not what I hadn't already seen a dozen times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole catalog of Seinfeld episodes, and I'm sure there is like a distribution right, of which episodes I've seen, because which ones do they play on syndication or
Exactly.
TBS or
And
something?
that also created a kind of a group mentality, and like a lot of, it was early memification in a way, or like not in the way we think about it now, because people would have catchphrases from those shows that they would say at the water cooler,
100%. Yeah.
So
How many movie quotes did you have with friends in like high school and college?
exactly. Yeah. How many times you just quote Monty Python back and forth at one another, and you just laugh at each other? It's not even funny
It's
if you're
called
like,
Big
from,
Teeth.
yeah. If you're not in the group, it's not funny. But
I don't know. You get kicked out of the group if you can't laugh at Monty Python.
fair.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you have so many different, like I was thinking about that today, well, not today, but recently, like YouTube is just going to be TV for kids in a way, right?
Yeah.
It,
It already has become that way
it,
for me. I don't really watch. I mean, occasionally a show will come across my radar now, and I'll try to turn it on.
mhm.
But I find, I mean, part of this is probably like my completely, speaking of Postman, my completely broken attention span. But like, I've got 45 minutes a day ish where I can turn the TV on, and that doesn't. It's not a lot of. I might watch one episode of like Slow Horses or something, and then the next day rolls, and I'm like zapped, and I forget. I forget about Slow Horses. I just turn on YouTube and like kind of shuffle around. And oftentimes I've been using it to like explore topics that I'm interested in. So I like feel less bad about my own screen time, but I don't know. That's a little bit of word dumping on you there.
No, that's a much healthier relationship than a lot of people have with the television. I think, in a way, 45 minutes a day is, I think, a very reasonable amount, and varying it like that is good. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, like of being able to have that what you want when you want it all the time, and other than skip ads, no commercials.
Well, here's another admission. I think we borrowed a Hulu account for a while, and this account had whatever it was the level with which there were commercials. We borrowed it because there was like one show we wanted to watch. So we started, and we found that like as soon as the commercials came on, especially me, I'd be up out of the couch, moving around. I'd find a chore to do. I could not watch it. I couldn't do it. I never finished that show. I need to, if I want to, I'll have to pay for a non-commercial or
Yeah,
no commercial
like
Hulu account.
I'm to that point in my life where I just cannot tolerate commercials at all. And if we're watching something as a commercial, I'm like, nope. I'm like, I'll go rent it on Amazon. I don't care.
Yes, I'll pay the $15.
You don't understand. Like it's insanity. So
It's a little bit. It's definitely like a place of privilege, but but also there was part of me that was like, maybe this is the only kind of Hulu subscription I should ever have, because I get up out of the couch and then I'm like, screw it, I'm going to bed. I'll read. 45 minutes gets cut down to like 15.
that's I think, again, healthy life choices. I'd say healthy life choices overall.
Yeah, but sometimes you just want to lay on the couch.
That's true. That's true. There is something very, I don't know. It's restorative in a way to just sit there, zone out, and just be
It's
kind
like
of
fika
conscious, but
or-
entertain. Kind of aloof. I don't know. It's a nice feeling sometimes.
It is. Sometimes I
But-
wonder if it's like one of those like staring at your phone. It's one of those things that feels good, but it's actually not good for you. Well, I know laying on the couch isn't good for you, but like maybe it is in whatever.
I mean, and yeah, and like
Armchair
a couple hours,
quarterbacking
or like
here.
an hour a week, or 2 hours a week. Like there's probably some level of just base
but not
level
an
of
hour a day.
chillness
Yeah,
that people need.
whatever.
I mean, what did they used to do when there were no lights and it was night? They were just
Well, there was a little bit more squatting on the ground, which included like a really nice posterior chain stretch, right? Which we're all like decimating our posterior chains by sitting in chairs.
that's true.
I don't know. I only have like sniffs of information here of people like reading or listening to people who like studied. What's the tribe? There's a tribe in like Eastern Africa or something like that that's still hunter gatherer, and they kind of like record how their time is spent and different things. I just think there's some interesting tidbits there, but it's a lot of rest. It's a lot of hanging out. It's a lot of not doing anything. But you know, they don't have chairs. So like it's standing, it's walking, squatting.
That
Sure, like I don't know what their life expectancy is because of hospital care and disease care and
I was going to
medicine and
say
all that kind of
there's
stuff,
a
right?
lot of
But if
probably
you
noise in
put
that
those
data.
yeah, if you put those controls in, then you know would their occurrences of back pain be like way nearer to zero than ours, for example? Like I just end up with questions.
Yeah. That is rather that's an interesting question because I definitely know I sit on my butt way too much throughout the
Same,
day,
yeah.
like in an office chair, in the evening at at the end of the day. It's
It's
just not
ubiquitous
healthy.
in our life. Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point, being 40, I'm kind of I'm like, am I just programmed this way for the rest of my life? Maybe. I don't know.
There's always time to change, Sean.
I guess so. I guess so. Speaking of time to change, no, I don't. I don't have a good transition.
There's no time. Broken segue.
Yeah, broken segue. I did want to dive into circle back to some from the Postman book. It was the idea of news that's good for you, like news that you can act on, right? That you actually can use to make a decision with. And so that's got me back to also thinking about a conversation that you and I were having. I'm going to pull up a chart here. So this part of the podcast might get cut out for the listening audience on the
You could leave it in,
podcasters.
but if you want to catch the visual, tune in on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. But please do feel free to hop over to YouTube, and I will even take this part out and drop it into a short so that you don't have to go listen to stuff you've already heard if you don't want to. Anyway, so Dan and I were chatting via text, and something just had been on my mind because I hadn't checked it in a while. And every once in a while, there's a number of kind of indicators, for lack of a better tab, I like to follow, check in on occasionally. And this is one of them. Yes. Sorry, it's from just a crappy website called multiple.com, but it has reasonably decent data. So this is called the Schiller price to index ratio, Schiller PE, which is actually basically adjusted price to earnings. So it's factoring in inflation and some other trends into the data to kind of smooth it out. But we're at 37 right now. And actually it was a little bit higher when I was texting you this week. I think it was like 30, closer to 38. But this is, they just report monthly. So we're in the middle of October, so it's moving on us. But no, so just overall, I was thinking about it and just I noticed like a sentiment change on Twitter where everybody starts talking about things are feeling expensive. And I come over here and I'm like, yeah, things are looking kind of expensive. And it makes me wonder what the next 12 months truly do bring. Because
so it's a price to earnings ratio, right?
Yeah. So what's effectively means, let's talk about this, right? Is if I buy something at a $37 average price to earnings, that means
you better hope earnings is going up.
You better hope earnings is going up, because it's going to take what is that? So for basically 37 years, effectively, to get paid back. That's not the right math. Yeah, it would be. It's going to take you effectively, 37 years essentially to get paid back. Something like that.
At current earnings.
At current earnings, yeah. So you're not ever going to get your investment back if earnings don't.
If you're 50.
Exactly. You're 50. So, and also you'll notice here, this is all time. We've really only been above this current level a couple of times. One was during the .com bubble, and the other was back in 2021, before things really start to fall off. And I went ahead and pulled the table version of this, again, which was monthly, did a little bit of math and found out
Was that late 21?
Let's zoom in and let's take a closer look, shall we, Dan? 5 years. It was late 21.
Late 21. That's when I wish I would have sold a whole bunch of stuff.
So we've only been above 37 2% of the time in the history of this index. less than 2%, 1.896% of the time.
So, given
We're in
historical
rarefied
records,
air we're in rarefied air on the price front is what
selling
I'm saying.
territory.
Yeah, absolutely. So now the question is that I've given you this information, Dan, what's the trade?
Puts.
That's exactly where my head was at. That's exactly where my head was at. I started this week going and costing some SPY puts.
That's broad.
Right?
So if the entirety of the market is showing a really, really high PE ratio, wouldn't you then want to go and look at the stocks with the highest PE ratio and target them?
Exactly. So just underweight your index. You could do a custom index here, underweight it with the ones with super high PE ratios at a much lower percentage, right? Because there's still a chance they keep going up.
And I think if you're just being totally quantitative about it, that's where you could stop. Lots of diversification built in and whatever. Or if you want to get a little picky about it, go in there and decide like, well, this company is a true rocket ship, and I do expect earnings to keep inflating over the next however many years, right? And throw that one out of the basket.
Which
so
could be the argument for NVIDIA, like the one that where you look at their earnings, that they have kept up with that ridiculous, with the price. Like it makes sense. Every time they release earnings, I think they just released a forecast, didn't they, this week? And it was something where their previous forecast, they were projecting 2025 revenue to be like 75 billion. And now it's going to be not revenue. That would have been, I think earnings, like 75 billion earnings. And now they're projecting 150 billion. Like it just doubled from the last time they did a forecast. It's insane. Those numbers aren't exactly right. Don't quote me on that. But hey, we're giving lovely ad space to these toilets. I'm also going to hop over here to something a little more less visually stimulating, we'll say. Anyway, so just looking at some other macro indicators, again, thinking about something else that came across my mind this week was Howard Marks put out another lovely memo. But he had a really simple idea that I thought was worth discussing, is that there's really only two asset classes. We talk about in a lot of the investment management world, the different types of, foreign stocks, domestic stocks, small cap, large cap,
corporate bonds, government bonds.
But really when it comes down to, there's fundamentally just two asset classes, debt and equity, right?
Yeah.
So looking at what's been going on in rates lately, it feels like it finally might be time to start buying up some debt. Just thinking about as rates have started to uninvert finally, looking here at the St. Louis Federal Reserve's economic database, aka FRED, we're sharing on the screen currently the 10-year treasury rate minus 2-year treasury rate, which you see for most of history. The 10-year is above zero, because the 10-year implies term risk, because something could happen between now and 10 years versus now and 2 years that you would want to be paid back at a higher interest rate for. So this chart is taking the interest rate of the 10 minus the 2. When it's negative, the 10-year is giving you less interest than the 2-year, which is an unusual situation, but one we've been in for the last couple of years. And often, as you notice on this chart, the gray areas being periods of recessions. Often those periods can precede periods of recessions, but not always. There's been some false positives on that trend being true as well. But we're finally starting to see it uninvert, and all this is making me think, yeah, it's time to take a little bit out of the SPY and put a little bit into maybe some sort of credit vehicles, possibly high yield bonds, or even some government securities. Now that the 10-year is starting to trade above 4% again.
Why a high yield?
Because I still like yield. That's a good point, though.
My question is like, okay, so if you're going into an environment where PE is too high, the yield curve is uninverting, which is sometimes, not always, followed by a recession, right? So everything's frothy and bubbly.
Yep.
We have a big indicator showing that a recession should be like right around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't there be more corporate defaults in an environment like that.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. Where high yield would absolutely imply more risk. I wonder what's a good high yield index? HYG.
Sounds familiar. I can't say that I've ever really looked.
Boom. iShares high yield growth index site chart. All right. So let's think about that. Yeah, I'm probably off base here, and thank you for pointing that out. So if we are expecting, we have some possible recessionary, flags that have.
If you're trying to protect, if you're trying to find some yield in
if you're trying to
stormy seas,
yeah, find yield in stormy seas, and just and one thing, the reason that yields are going up is because demand has gone down, right? That's what it's inversely correlated to the demand. People are willing to not willing to pay as much, so the yields are rising, which makes certain things seem more of a value option. But yeah, if we look here from in going into a recessionary period, HYG, the iShares High Yield Corporate Bond ETF, which I'm just using as a proxy for all high yield corporate bonds because that's essentially what it is. We see it performed just as shit as everything else during the 2008 recession, and didn't do terribly. No, it did exactly what. I'm sorry, it was. What am I thinking here? That's 22. It was pretty much exactly correlated here, along with what the S&P would have been. Actually, let's drop in the S&P. Why don't we? I'm going to have to go to time period. So yeah, even during, it's been very very much correlated right with the S&P. So yeah, you're right. Not going to be a good proxy for defensiveness. Okay. So what kind of credit instruments would you be looking at?
I mean, the really really classics are like gold.
Ag's a little better,
but I feel like that's like a default answer, right? It's everyone with half an interest knows that particular answer.
More or less the same shape, though.
Okay, let's play out. Let's do stories instead of math for just a hot minute.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry.
If we're moving into this environment that we're playing around with, what does it look like? Is it an almost soft downward pressure where everything that's been cooking kind of keeps cooking and there's some pruning around the edges, really mild? Or is it pronounced enough that there's some real pockets of heat, meaning there is more incentive in the world for conflict or people countries taking advantage of a weaker United States or something like that, and then particular sectors find themselves moving strongly in particular directions? Consumer discretionary down hard, defense and aerospace up, stuff like that, right? Like playing out scenarios.
So this is a good question. So do you just want to buy the bonds of Apple, TSM?
Well, I worry about TSM at that point.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Hot commodity.
Depends who's. Is it the debt for the U.S. factories or the Taiwan factories?
Well, okay. So put it this way. Other examples. I might have a not totally accurate here, but it was something along the lines of like Chrysler was going bankrupt, and this is like late 70s, early 80s or something like that. But they were the ones making tank engines or something, right? So the government saved them because they were a company that did stuff for the government that could absolutely not fail for national security reasons. Same with TSMC, right? So
yes,
if you've got half of Taiwan on fire and you're building this other facility in Arizona, you've lost a significant portion of your talent, probably from a total organization viewpoint. You've lost 85, 99% of your capacity. But in any other situation, you could look at a company like that and be like, well, they bit the dust, but this particular company would not bite the dust.
Yes.
So holding the bonds could be good.
And I would actually say the same for Boeing right now.
Yeah.
I think Boeing is in...
Unions are a real problem. Longshoremen.
Yeah.
Boeing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Boeing executives are a real problem too.
A lot of things are a real problem. And I was thinking, I wonder what it is like inside of their engineering organization. Because you hear a lot of stories from the outside of, and that's what, anecdotes from people that are willing to share information about how they view their their review processes and engineering processes have declined over the years. And I wonder, what the driver of that was. Was it added bureaucracy from becoming there's always been an extra level of paperwork required to do aviation. The FAA has a lot of more standards than most other industries. Probably the only thing that I can imagine having much tougher standards is healthcare, really, possibly chip making on certain cleanliness specs.
Things.
Yeah, very few things in terms of process, though. I think are as dictated as aviation in terms of what kind of testing things must go through, and for good reason. And that's also why we hear about plane crashes once in a while, but you look at how few of them are compared to how many people travel. It's microscopic. One of the safest modes of transportation, despite a lot of people's fears. But Boeing just seems like they've had serious quality issues. I don't know how else to describe it, and that to me it implies that there's internal breakdowns in their systems, and that either they're going to have to be broken up or saved. I don't know. It just
but
like
when you save something, don't you want it fixed?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So it would be coming in and saying we're going to wipe some of this slate clean, and I don't know, and I don't know who you hired
The
to bring
board
in
and sweet seat are gone.
Yeah.
It's I think there's a real there's a common argument that's real pernicious with this that is partially right and partially wrong, in my view. Is that shareholder value and the pursuit of it is what destroys companies like this. And I think some of that's right, and I think some of that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Shareholder value should be a pursuit. Otherwise, what's a company doing necessarily, unless it's part of the government or a nonprofit or something, right? However, everything's a gradient, and when too much of that gradient is towards shareholder value in an engineering driven workplace, business, product, I think you're giving up way too much, because R&D is expensive, R&D is exploratory, R&D has failure, and you should be inviting these kinds of things in order to produce and find the best solutions to the future. And also having a single point of failure in a newly designed plane is stupid, and a lesson that was learned decades and decades and decades ago. And you see these things, and it's really easy to point to cost cutting, business driven stuff rather than engineering. So I think there's a misbalance. I think culturally it's a misbalanced organization, and they've had a CEO who is very much just an engineer, but maybe a financial engineer, and it seems that they're trying to hire another one of the same ilk.
I would very much agree with that. And you think about the generation of planes and how they were evolving, it's like they just kept trying to copy the last one and just make it a little bit better, but without actually ever innovating. And they'd try to add new features, but actually that it wouldn't think through the whole portion of the design that was required on a more system-wide level, I think. And it just feels like there's, again, I think I said earlier, but I feel like there's a disconnect within the organization. Well, I think we've both been circling around that exact thing.
The incentives that the business should be pursuing and working toward aren't the incentives that the executives work towards. There's the break.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for numbers on their R&D spend. Actually, their overall capex spend is down substantially over the last decade. Almost 50%. I'd say it recently upticked for, I think, obvious reasons. But yeah, I mean, they were clearly not investing back in themselves in the way, and I'm sure because of financial considerations too. Also, how many airplane companies does the world need?
Well, we have 2, right? Or 3 if you include Bombardier.
Yeah, that's true.
I feel like you need more than one.
Yeah, you do. Need more than one.
Otherwise, everyone's going to get complacent and lazy, and you're going to continue having executive teams like we have at Boeing.
Is it that people aren't willing to pay more for air travel? Because it seems like Boeing would have some pricing power, or is Airbus just much more efficient?
Out over my skis at this point. I don't know what the cost.
No, I'm sorry. I'm getting too into the weeds here.
No, I mean, I think these are interesting questions, but you'd have, we could spitball, but we'd quickly go off course.
That's
the
very true.
cost per mile of ownership and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It all, that those numbers change. So, for example, like a plane that goes from Honolulu to Hilo 4 times a day goes under significantly more stress than the plane that goes from LAX to Sydney because of the pressure changes.
Interesting.
And takeoff and landing, right? So the plane in Hawaii that does these short little half-hour trips or half 45, whatever they're, won't have the lifespan that LAX Sydney plane could have. Of course, they're gonna end up being completely different planes, and this is not a perfect example, but these are the kinds of like data points that you'd have to kind of pull together to try to figure out. Or you look at Bombardier and they make particular planes for a different market within air travel.
Who is Embraer?
Embraer, Brazilian, yeah,
Yeah.
that's another one, yeah. My
I
LaGuardia
like their little
Indianapolis
express
flights.
jets. Those are fun to ride on.
Yeah, fun is one way to put it. As long as you get the seat that's by itself.
Yes. The aisle, the single. We have the aisle and the window. That is the best seat in air travel.
The whole industry, yeah. Except that I can't stand up in those planes.
Fair. That's. I don't mind tipping my head over like this as I walk down the aisle. It's fine because it's worth having both an aisle and a window.
Yeah, I mean it is pretty killer. I do. I did always appreciate being able to snag that seat, even if it was further back.
Yeah, exactly. Don't care. I don't mind sitting on an extra 2 minutes. What's the big deal? Everybody's always in such a hurry to get off. I mean, I get it. I do want to get off.
I always like to get
please
off.
move. But
yeah.
Most of your wait time is just getting like them to open the dang door. Once that happens, it starts to move. Anyway, we've meandered.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2% of the time or less, we've been at this level on the S&P, and that just I just wonder where we're going over the next 12 months because something's got to adjust, something's got to tweak, somewhere.
Yeah, the whole bet is whether it's the P or the E. I mean, that's like the point of a ratio, but.
Okay.
Are you going to place any?
So I'm trying to think.
Say?
What's the trade here? That's what now I'm trying to say. What if we're going to place a bet? What's our trade? Because we got ourselves a paper trading account, so we can go place a bet here and just see how it plays out. I'm trying to think what the play is. If it's SPY puts or gold
or SPY puts and NVIDIA calls.
That's an interesting call.
The AI future. Earnings goes down. NVIDIA becomes the most important company in the world, right ahead of TSMC because they're making all the chips.
And ASML because they're making all of TSMC's equipment.
Yeah, although ASML got knocked the other day.
Yeah, because their forecast was down for 25, right? Or 26?
Yeah.
One of the two?
And I'm always like, did the executive team just like, hey, employees, we're going to say some stuff. Buy the stock.
Well, I think I think it was China impact. China reducing, and I think being restricted on what they're supposed to sell to China too, right? Like that sucks for ASML because they have a customer base that just basically got whacked. I don't know what to say. But I mean,
strategic resources.
Exactly. So that there probably is a limit on their upside, which is probably again why they got whacked this week. But I think they're still now that after the discounting, they're moving upward again.
Yeah, long term, I think that's all good.
Anyway, the last half of the show is getting to get brutally edited, but that's okay.
All right, shall we sign
brutal
off?
Editing coming through on this episode. I feel it.